Hey guys, Pastor Jeremy here. Thanks for joining us today for another edition of Live at Lunch here on our Facebook feed. Today I'm joined by John Williams and his lovely wife, Emily Williams. John's our Director of Student Ministries, and behind the scenes, Emily does all the work. But we just thought it would be a great idea to have these two join us today. You guys know we've covered a wide swath of information at these lunchtime Q&As, and one of the first ones we did was Parenting Through a Pandemic with Willis Dietz and Michelle Niebel, and they talked specifically about smaller children and things that we could do to occupy their time and to disciple them during an awkward time. But we brought John and Emily on today to talk to maybe those of us parents that have a little older kids, like student ministry age. Some of the questions that we're going to deal with today will be like COVID-driven, but some of them would be just general discipleship questions in general. So John and Emily, thanks for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you guys with us. So we'll jump right in and we'll go ahead and get started. John, I think everybody would agree that this whole COVID crisis and the subsequent quarantine has caused a lot of stress in everybody, and our kids aren't immune from this stress. And a lot of them have experienced a lot of losses this year. I'm thinking about I've got a senior at home. Basically, his senior year was canceled, all the activities and things like that. Now, our kids might not come to us and say, "Mom, Dad, I'm grieving, I'm stressed out, I don't know what to do." But what are some of the things or behaviors that we as parents of students should be looking for so we can be proactively pursuing them to care for them well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I thought about this with our teenagers. Most of the time what we see with teenagers is they don't actually, like you said, they don't know how they feel. They often can't even articulate what they feel, and oftentimes it's not until they have some kind of overreaction that they realize that this whole time that they've been sad or anxious or whatever, and so they'll have panic attacks or they'll just burst out crying for no reason or just have an emotional reaction. And that's usually by the time this has been happening. They've been living in this world of anxiety and fear and even maybe depression and all those things. And so I would say one of the main signs that I've noticed in our students, and I've seen it many times taking them to camp and being on trips with them and having them here on Wednesday nights. And just after 6 years of doing student ministry, you start seeing these signs. And what you'll notice is that most students begin to get more withdrawn, and they begin to become more independent in some sense, where they'll sort of escape into their phones, and they'll kind of hide in their bedrooms. They don't talk as much, and that withdrawn feeling or that withdrawn demeanor is usually a sign that they're feeling something. They're feeling some kind of something that they may not even realize they're feeling it at the moment. And so actually, just the other day, I was sitting out. We were playing basketball. I was playing basketball with my boys, and I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And Murray is our 6-year-old, and he was. All of a sudden, we were like playing basketball, and all of a sudden, he just sat down and put his hands under his chin, and he just was sitting there. And I was like, "What are you doing, man? We're playing basketball." And he said, I don't know, I'm just sad. And I was like, "You're sad?" I said, "What are you sad about?" He's like, I want to see our family. We haven't seen our family in so long." And then he said kind of a funny thing. It was kind of sad, but it was also kind of funny. He was like, I'm just sad without my friends by my side. And it was really sweet and it was cute. But what I did after that was I just took him in and I sat next to him and I just said, "Hey, so tell me why you tell me more about why you're sad." I just started asking clarifying questions. And then what we did is we took a second to pray. So me and Murray and JB all held hands and prayed like good Baptists. And and we prayed together, and then I ended up saying, "Hey, let's just go for a walk. Let's just go be out in the sun. Let's go just kind of enjoy the outdoors." It was beautiful outside, and we did. We walked and talked, and we celebrated things, and we talked. And that's one of the best ways to draw your student out is just to say, "What's one thing we can celebrate?" And that's just a helpful question. And we did. We just celebrated things, and so I would just look for those signs, like just withdrawn and just kind of a sense of they just don't want to be around people. Usually that signifies that they're kind of withdrawing into themselves a little bit. So
that's great. Emily, any thoughts on that? Anything you would add to that?
I mean, this honestly can go for any age kid. Oh, sorry. Okay, this can go for any age kid that you have, really. But as parents, we know that our kids, they really feel the things that we're feeling, even if they don't. Even if we don't we maybe try to hide it, or we try to act like we're not feeling something, they catch on to those feelings. And teenagers are the same. I think that sometimes we forget that. Maybe we're a little too honest with them sometimes and just, say whatever we're thinking. So I would say, we could be careful if you happen to be somebody that's a little more worry prone, or you kind of think worst case scenario and you're just spouting off a bunch of stuff like that. Well, your teenager is really going to pick up on that. But the same is if you just withdraw, your teen's going to pick up on that too. So I think in general, for parents of all ages, this coronavirus pandemic can serve as a kind of an accountability for our kids, can serve as accountability for us. How are we responding? If we're responding by, letting ourselves feel scared or at times hopeless, but then fighting for hope and fighting for truth and fighting for what we believe, that our kids are going to pick up on that. I think one of the worst things we could do as parents, especially of teenagers who can understand these things and can, they can process it a lot better than our 6-year-old and 3-year-old, is to act like it's going to be fine, we're fine, don't worry about it, or God's got this, let go and let God, and not let our kids or let our students see that it is scary. There are things to be nervous about. It is stressful. If you're out of work, or their father's out of work, and they see that it's okay to talk about that and express and show, like, I am worried, but this is what I do with my worry, and let them process that with you. I think can just go so far with your teenager, to just kind of process that with you. As a believer, you're raising up, hopefully, other younger believers. And so you just want to take them on that process with you. Life is hard. It's full of really low lows and high highs, and you want to show them what the gospel looks like in the midst of all those. This is the perfect opportunity to do that.
That's great input. Yeah, I would say as a dad, one of my biggest regrets, having parented teenagers for quite some time, I think our parental instinct is want to swoop in and save our kids. We want to protect them from harm and fear or anxiety and all that. And that was a really great word. Some of the best things that we can do for them is allow them to feel that, sit in that, and show them where ultimate hope lies. So thanks for that, Emily. I'll stick with you for the next question. One of the things that I really have grown to appreciate about you and doing life with you and being in church with you over the last few years is you're a really good question asker and listener. I've appreciated that in our friendship, and I've watched you even pursue my own daughters and ask questions and listen really well. With that said, maybe our students aren't acting out during this pandemic. In fact, let's just set the pandemic aside for just a second. What have you found to just be some good leading questions to ask the students that you do ministry with, to kind of really mine, because they're not quick to just give it to you. What are some of those good leading questions you found to find out really what's going on in our kids' hearts and their minds?
Okay, so I thought a lot about this, and it's very tricky. Any parent of a teenager knows how tricky, and it's like walking a tightrope. I mean, if I was giving advice to like how to be a good friend and how to really dig at the heart questions with a friend, it would be very different advice. As a parent of a teenager, the first thing I want to say before we even talk about questions is just, you probably know this by now. Your teenagers are smart, and they know when you're trying to get them to say something, and they hate that. I mean, we hate that. John hates it when I do it to him. And so you have to, that doesn't mean that you just give up and don't ask them anything, but it does mean that you just want to be, I think, careful about your motives. If you go into you knock on your daughter's bedroom door and you sit on her bed, and you're going in there with the sole purpose of wanting to know why she hasn't left her room in 24 hours, and you think that she's probably been texting a boy that she wasn't supposed to text, and that's like, that's what your end goal, she's going to smell that on you the minute you knock on her door and walk in her room. And it's just not going to go well. Immediately, it's going to be a fight. And so, unfortunately, if you don't have a very close relationship with your teen, and you aren't really ever talking about anything but surface level stuff, and barely even that, then I want to tell you that you need to probably look at this as like the long game. Like, I can't give you quick advice that's going to help you get to the heart behind your teen's struggles and sin in 5 easy steps, because the parents that are able to get to those heart places with their teens have been putting in the work for many, many years, and doing it knowing that they still may not get the end result that they want. And so things you can do to ask good questions. Is my mic not working? Oh, okay. But you know, the
Her battery died.
Here. Sorry.
okay. Okay. Do I have to start over, or can I just?
We lost about 10 or 15 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so you want to play the long game, basically. You want to be, if you haven't already, if you don't have the kind of relationship where you're getting deep with your teen, then look at it as just a long haul relationship building. It's not going to be a realistic expectation that your teenager is just going to start pouring their heart out to you if they've gone many months or maybe even years without sharing that stuff. So again, don't just think, okay, I'm going to try this new strategy and this will finally break through to the heart behind my teenager. Instead, here's just some practical things I would advise you to do is to make being around your teenager a regular thing. Your goal should be to just bring this level of comfort. Like, your teenager shouldn't feel, if you desire for your teen to get to the heart, like their heart and really what's going on, then they should be able to sit. Let's say you should be able to take them out for dinner or coffee at Starbucks, and it's not really awkward. It's just comfortable. It's what you do. Or if that sounds terrible, like go fishing with your teen, or take a walk or go for a run. One day, again, we'll be able to get manicures and pedicures or whatever. I mean, something like that, where you are just creating an atmosphere where you just do life with your teen. And I would say really take away any expectation. Yes, ask questions, but if they don't give you anything, be totally fine with that and let them know that's fine. I just want to be with you. You're my kid. I enjoy you. I enjoy being around you. And we could talk, let them kind of navigate that. And I promise, I really think if you do that consistently, the parents I can think of, and my parents when I was a teenager, the ones that can get that really talk to their teenagers about serious life things are the ones that are just around their teenagers a lot. Your student will typically say, like, I enjoy being with my parents or something like that. So you want to just be comfortable. And then, like I said, I mean, there's tons of resources and books and I'm happy to talk about it. I love talking about the topic of really probing the heart and asking good questions. But I think for today, it would more just be helpful to say, making it a regular rhythm to be in a relationship with your teen without the expectation of them sharing stuff with you. Because if they feel comfortable around you and that they can trust you, then when they need to talk, they will. And they will talk about stuff. If they trust you, they will eventually talk to you. And also, we just have to be okay with, like, sometimes teenagers don't want to talk to adults about sin. And that is just the truth too. And that includes me. I mean, I have high schoolers, and I know they don't view me as their mom, but sometimes they would just rather talk to their friends about it. And, again, our end goal as parents and as student pastors and leaders is not to get them to confess all of their sin, but it's to just constantly be pushing them towards the gospel. So
that's super helpful. Thank you for taking that direction. And John, I'm going to say something, but you be thinking about this. We'll play out a scenario saying that a parent has put in the time to have that relational equity. Then maybe you could pick up on maybe some of those helpful questions. So some of our parents might say, hey, I need to start where Emily just gave us some encouragement. I need to just start being around my kid. Maybe there's some parents listening like, hey, that's the way we do life around here. I feel like I've got that relationship. I struggle to get that conversation started. I want you to talk about that in just a second. But I do want to make a quick comment. When you were talking about just being okay with them not talking, I was immediately reminded of something Pastor Brad Rhodes says here all the time about expectations being a killer of relationships. We do that in our marriages all the time. And I just thought that was a really, really wise encouragement that even if you do everything right, there's going to be times they just don't want to talk and you don't get out of your kids really what you're desiring. And man, I failed my kids so many times because I think they can see my frustration or my disgust when I've kind of got an end goal, the word that you used, rather than just loving and wanting to be around my kids. So that was a super helpful answer. Thanks, Emily. John, assuming that a parent has that kind of relationship with their kids, how do we get those conversations going?
That's good. I would say definitely, obviously, what Emily said was on point for sure. I would say a lot of those conversations begin with just listening. Instead of being a lecturer, be a listener. And that means asking questions that do kind of lead into some of those deeper topics. Sharing stories about yourself is really important as well. So I think like making sure they know that your life wasn't perfect. And I think as a parent, it's good to air a little bit of your dirty laundry in some sense, to say, hey, look, like this was a time when I just made a totally bonehead decision, and I just want you to know that I'm not perfect. You know, I mean, it doesn't have to look that formal, but definitely sharing those stories about yourself. But also, I think creating an environment of forgiveness as well in your house is going to give your students a safer place to share with you some of those deeper things. So, for example, one of the things I found hard is going to my 6-year-old and saying, hey, this is where Dad messed up. Like, I failed you. I sinned against you. And I want to confess to you that I'm so sorry, and I want to ask for your forgiveness. And that is a good rhythm to get into. Now, he doesn't quite probably we probably don't see as much the fruit of that now because he's so young. But especially as kids get older, and if that's the rhythm, then they are going to continually say, oh man, like my parents are sinners too, so we can have some of these conversations because I know they're a safe place. I know that they recognize their own sin and they needed Jesus' forgiveness as much as I need Jesus' forgiveness. And it just creates a safer environment to share and talk when you pursue forgiveness, even from your rebellious teenager. And I'm even saying your teenager who is misbehaving terribly throughout the week, going to them and saying, I have sinned against you. I yelled at you. I snapped at you, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have been more patient. And then, ask for their forgiveness, I think is just a really important way to get that conversation started. So.
Yeah. I'll stay with you for just a second because I've heard you talk a little bit about this before, and it was helpful to me. You've talked about parental response. Once a student either confesses sin or comes to their parents with something big, I've heard you talk about that. That's make or break time. Like, I mean, it's been teed up for you, Mom and Dad. What we do with this, our response, maybe the first time it happens, can really set the stage or the trajectory for that relationship going forward. Could you talk a little bit to us parents that have blown it and those that maybe haven't experienced that yet, the importance of response?
Yeah, so I would say I have told parents this. Parents have always asked me, what is the one thing that we can do to really support your ministry? And I've said, listen, the one thing that we do when we counsel with students, because they'll bring us their deepest, darkest sins and struggles. And our first response is, have you talked to your parents about this? And then we talk with them about whatever that thing is. And at the end, we say, I want you to go home and I want you to talk to your parents about this. And most of the time they have been like, no. I'm not talking to my parents about this. And the reason why, and I've been guilty of this with Murray as well, is that our response as parents oftentimes is to blow up or freak out or almost be like in this state of like shock that our kids would ever do this thing that they are sharing with me right now. And so I would say initial response to them sharing even the ugliest sin is so very important. It's vital for our response to our kids. This is how I think about it. Our initial response to our kids' sin should be as a brother or sister in Christ rather than just an authority figure. Our initial response should be to listen, understand, ask questions, and bring scripture to the table. Talk about, if they do seem repentant over their sin, talk about the gospel and say, hey, I'm so glad you shared this with me because I'm a sinner. I need grace just as much as you do. And once you give that safety net, now this doesn't mean though that there's no discipline. Yeah. So I think one of the things that you can do with you can be proactive is, I think as a couple, Emily and I have had conversations like this before, prepare yourself. Like, go ahead and have a plan for what happens when, not if, but when our kid fails majorly. Because every kid is going to sin. They're going to fall into something. Today, it's pornography and lust. It's, making out with boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the thing is. There's always temptation. Satan's always tempting our students. So I would say make a plan. Sit down and say, hey, when our kid comes to us, how are we going to respond to this? And you can even tell your kids that plan ahead of time. Like, say, hey, listen, if you ever fall into sin, we are a safe place. We are going to respond with grace. And then you can even tell them ahead of time. You can say, listen, we're also, though, at the end, we will talk about discipline. If discipline is the right mode of action after they have shared with you, go ahead and tell your students that's coming. But I don't want that to stop you from coming to us and telling us this sin, because this could be the perfect opportunity maybe for your student to get saved in the gospel and to be sanctified in Jesus Christ. And so we want them to share with us. And the passage that comes to mind is Romans 7, where Paul says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do.
Been there.
And yeah, exactly. And so he's like putting on display this sin nature. So we should never be surprised that our kids are going to sin. We should never be shocked by that. We should always, though, have a seriousness of sin, of course, and we should take steps to put that sin to death. But our initial response is what is going to determine whether or not our students are going to come back and talk with us. And so I'll give you just a quick example real quick. There was this woman at a church at a previous student ministry, and she shared with me in a panic. She came up to me before church, and she said, John, my son, he just shared with me that all of his friends are cussing and telling dirty jokes at school. And I was like, okay, that's that's pretty standard, high school behavior, and so she's like freaking out. She's like, what do I do? Do I put him in a private school? Do I take him out of the public school and put him in a Christian school? And she's in this, and I'm like, okay, let's calm down. Let's take a deep breath. Your son's not dying. It's okay. And so what I found out later after talking with her son is that when he said my friends, he was confessing to her, my friends are cussing and telling dirty jokes, he was testing her. He was testing her reaction, because what he really wanted to do was confess to his mom that he's been cussing and telling dirty jokes. But he saw her reaction and was just like, yeah, I guess I'll just stop hanging out with those friends. That was his response. And so I would say that initial response is going to help, because ultimately sometimes your kids might be kind of testing the waters to see how you're going to respond, because they need a safe place to share. So anyway,
Man, super helpful. When you talked about like the initial response, treating them not necessarily as an authority, but as a brother or sister in Christ, the verse that immediately came to my mind was Galatians 6. If anyone's caught in a trespass, including our born-again children, that those of you who are spiritual should restore them in a spirit of gentleness. And there's also some humility in that verse, too. Keeping watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted, realizing, hey, that we've been there, too. That's really good. Super helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Emily, just to kind of follow up to that, we know that the Scriptures give us, like, repeated exhortations and encouragements about the benefits of confession, not only of sin to God, but to one another, that vulnerability and confession is part of our sanctification process within Christian community. And as parents, hopefully we're growing in this. But what ideas do you have, to kind of follow up to what John just shared, what ideas might you have for parents to lead their kids to see confession of sin as a needed and good thing, even though there might come consequence on the backside, assuming that we're doing it right? How can we model that, or how can we get our kids to see the beauty in confession?
Well, I'm going to steal from, this is not my own concept, but I got a lot of this from Paul Tripp's book, Parenting, best parenting book I've ever read. And it's really not even about parenting. It's about you and your relationship with the gospel. And he talks just about how, like, that, the way you view the gospel and how you are living out the gospel on a daily basis is the direct correlation to how you're going to parent your kids. And I would just say, constantly be thinking, what is your end goal with your child? Is it, because you might be able to say the right answer, but do you really believe that with your heart? For example, when your child confesses or gets caught in a lie, is your very first reaction and the first thing you say to them, how dare you lie to me? It's an understandable response. It sucks to be lied to. That's not a good feeling, and you told your kid not to lie to you, and after all you've done for your kid, how dare they lie to you? Totally natural response, but parents, I'm talking to myself too, that is sin in our own hearts, because our first goal is not that our child never lies to us. So there's no there's not an exact script for this, but if we are really believing the gospel and really thinking gospel-minded parenting, then our first reaction, and I don't know how this would play out, but our first reaction is more sadness over you broke you sinned against a holy God. I'm so sad because sin destroys, and it is not what God wants. It is against God. It is everything that Jesus died for. That is, we should respond with a sadness. Now, this is not a natural thing, but it is possible. It is totally possible with the gospel. You can see this played out in your marriage as well. I mean, I'm convicted of this a lot. If John sins against me or something, it's just so easy to immediately, how dare you, that made me feel this way. But really, if I'm loving him with the gospel, then what I want him to be a more loving husband and father, because I want him to be more like Christ. I want to be pushing him more towards the gospel, towards his Savior. And that is exactly what we want for our teenagers. We want this in parenting in general, but the struggle, I think, that comes up a lot with raising teenagers is that their sin becomes so much more serious than it used to be. And now they're dealing with adult sins. And understandably so, they're a lot scarier. They come with a lot more consequence. And, it's just, it becomes a lot, the stakes are higher, and it's just harder. But the goal is the same. So I think if you check your response and really think about it, that, like John said, that does not mean that there's no discipline involved. We know that from God. God disciplines those he loves. Amen. So we know that discipline comes with that. That is our job as parents, is to discipline when they lie to us. And there should be consequences with that. But we want to show them that, and the reason we don't fly off the handle is because we understand our own sinfulness, our own brokenness, and that we are just, that's why Brandon leads us in that every single week. We confess our sin. We have broken the law. We are going against our Father and Creator. We need to experience that every day. Our students need to experience that every day, because, of course, we know that the good news that comes with that follows that. Once we understand the depths of our sin, not that they broke their parents' hearts, but they break God's heart. They broke, they are separated from God. Then we can understand what Jesus has done for us, and your students can understand what Jesus has done for them. So in every instance of confession and or sometimes, I want to say a lot of times it's going to be more like them getting caught than confession. But whatever situation you find yourself in with your student where the sin has been brought to light, it needs to always be bathed in the gospel. And I think sometimes our parents, and we do this too, and we don't even have teenagers yet, but it stops short with the gospel. And I think it's almost out of fear of if I give them too much grace, to show them too much grace and forgiveness, and even talk about that, then they might do it again. But again, that's not the point. I tell my high school students, my girls in my community group, this every week when we talk about stuff, and the typical sins come up. And sometimes they're just we're generically talking about them. Sometimes it's a real confession. But I always end up coming to this point. My goal, I always tell them, my goal this morning is not that you will walk out of this room and never have premarital sex, never do drugs, never drink alcohol. Now, I hope you don't have premarital sex, and I hope you don't. I don't want you to fall into these sins. They have serious consequences, and this is why we talk about this, but that is not my goal, because what good is that, right? They could go out and follow all those rules for the rest of their lives, and if they don't know Christ, then that's going to do them no good in eternity. Yeah. And so what I want them to know more is the gospel, that they are broken, whether they have premarital sex or not. They are broken and sinful and separated from God apart from Christ. And so with that in mind, again, this is easier for me to do as their community group leader than it is as a parent. When you just, and I tell my girls that a lot too, your parents just want to protect you. They want to keep you safe. But if you really keep that goal in mind with confession, what is the end game? It is not that they will never lie to you again. Yeah. It feels like that. It feels like that you want that to be the goal, but it's not. The goal is that they understand that sin, they feel it, and then they've confessed it and received the grace of Christ. Yeah. And they will, even if they graduate high school knowing that, even if they've lied 20 times, if they know the grace, they truly understand the grace of Christ and what they've been saved from, they will walk out ready for the real world to live for Christ.
That's super, super helpful. I'll tell you why that doesn't happen a lot in homes of teens. That takes a lot more time. That takes time to do that. And as you were talking, I was just convicted, just like at the pace most of us live our lives when situations, and you're right, it's more caught than confessed when you're dealing with teenagers, but it's easier just to snap, blow, address the sin rather than really spending the time to apply the balm of the gospel to that. So just any parents listening, maybe we just need to slow down a little bit with our kids and give them Jesus more. Let's finish up this way, guys. 30 seconds, John, and then coming to you with the same question, Emily. Anything that we haven't talked about today, if you could leave parents with just one little nugget, kind of living in the world of student ministry, what's one parting encouragement, word of advice is something that you'd like to leave our parents with today?
I would probably say do not be afraid or nervous that forcing your children to come to church is going to push them further away from Christ. I think there's a level of forcing that goes a little too far, but I do think on one hand there's two priorities I believe within the church for our students to have this habit of gathering together. If your students are not attending Sunday worship, where Jameis is preaching and we're hearing worship through Brandon, and so I would say they need to be here for that. That is number one priority because they're going to hear the gospel. They're going to see you worship. And so I would say have them here for that. The second priority is student community groups. So this is not a plug for me to have big numbers or whatever the case is, but community groups is where discipleship and relationships happen. Sure. And so we have created this is awesome. We have more students. We have probably 15 to 20 more students coming on Sunday mornings to community groups than on Wednesday nights. And I'm totally fine with that. Like if my numbers are not super high on Wednesdays, hey, that's cool with me. Okay. Mm-hmm. I would much rather students be here on Sunday mornings and be engaging in community groups on Sunday mornings. So if it takes them grumbling all the way, then let's do it anyway, because they need to hear the gospel and they need to see you worshiping and you engaging with the sermon, because I think that's just priority. So
yeah, super helpful. Emily, one last thought.
Okay, so I really feel like my parents did a very good job. I was very close to them, and I'm still very close to them. So I was thinking, what is it that they did? They did make me go to church. They I don't know, they did a lot of the by the book things, but I would say the thing that they did the best is they just made a relationship with Christ look so attractive. It never seemed like a duty. They loved each other so well, and the way it seemed to me was that it was because of their relationship with God that made them just love and enjoy each other so much. They enjoyed my sisters and me. They enjoyed being with us. They made life fun and pleasant, and life wasn't always easy. We had plenty of struggles growing up, but I always saw why. It always just made sense. I want to know Christ. I see what it's done for my parents. So I would just say, if you are not growing in your relationship with God, and if you're real stale and not spending time with Him, then all of this stuff is just going to be, you might as well just follow a step-by-step guide and trying to be the best parent you can be. But if your source is your relationship with God, it's going to make a world of difference. So start with that. Be in the Word. Really focus on just loving God and loving your spouse, and then the parenting part will come. It may not be perfect. We are not in charge of our kids ultimately and what's going to end up happening with them, but I think that's the place to start.
Super helpful. John, Emily, thanks for being with us today. This was awesome. I hope you guys found our conversation today helpful to you guys. I know I was blessed and I was helped by it, encouraged in some areas, convicted in some. I hope it was a help to you guys too. John, you guys will be on Instagram tomorrow night, 6:45 p.m. Don't miss that. If you've got a student Instagram Live, John goes on there, does some teaching, very interactive. Get your student involved in that. And then also Pastor Brandon, I believe, is going to be going live worship from his home with Miss Tara tomorrow night at 6 p.m. So don't forget those two things. Thanks again for joining us, man. Your pastors love you guys. We're praying for you. Grace and peace to you.